Okay, well, welcome everybody to another Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. We have got a slightly different format today. Me and Jade are breaking new ground and trying out Teams as an alternative vehicle for this. But it'll be the same as before, and we'll share some slides in a moment. But as you can see, Jade Pearce is here. Du-du-du-du. Yeah, super Jade. We were just offline talking about both of our lack of confidence with tech, but also, Jade managed to heighten the intellectual level of the conversation by saying about how potentially cortisol affects cognitive load. So there's a blog post for you, Jade, or for somebody to kind of do. So let's get the slides up, and they're all ready to go. So, dun dun dun. Happy days. Here we go then. So there's a lovely picture of Jade. You happy with that picture, Jade?
Lovely, thanks.
In the questionnaire, Jade was like, just use the social media one. I was like, okay, if you're sure. So yeah, we're going to get Jade
Wow,
to
what's the
introduce
issue with the
herself.
picture? I feel like now I should have chosen a better one.
Well, I know, but I mean, in the questionnaire, I try to ask people whether they've got a specific question because I wouldn't want the first thing to come on and then they go, oh, I hate that picture. But yeah, it's interesting what people choose. I took it as you are, all about education, not about yourself. So that was good. So here we go. So yeah, so Jade, you are the head of education for Affinity Learning Partnership. What does that mean?
So, Affinity Learning Partnership is a trust of 7 schools in Derbyshire and Staffordshire. So we've got 4 primary schools and 3 secondary schools. And essentially, my job is to lead on everything in education across the 7 schools. So obviously that is quality of education, curriculum, teaching and learning, staff CPD, etc. But then it's also behaviour, SEND, attendance, etc. Everything else.
Wow. Well, there'll be people on the podcast listening who say, "Oh, I've got a similar job," and then there'll be people like me who feel a bit more guilty in that I only do a fraction of that, and yet I still think I've got a pretty big job. So yeah,
Yeah, it's
interesting.
all different levels, isn't it? I think it's it depends on what that role entails. I think everyone's
Yeah,
as busy as each other, definitely.
of course they are. Well, tell us a bit about because you didn't always do that. What did you do before?
So I've always worked in education. But so prior to this, I worked in a large trust where I led teaching and learning and CPD, but only those aspects. So this is a smaller trust, but allows me to lead across a wider range of areas. Before
Nice.
that, I led teaching, learning and CPD in a secondary school, and I'd actually been there for I think 14 years when
Wow.
I left. So I started as an ECT. And did pastoral roles to start off with, so head of year and head of house, and then head of department, and then assistant head, and then stepped out into kind of school improvement work.
Yeah. And what was the subject? What's your subject specialism?
Business and economics.
Oh, we'll check you out.
Mm.
Yeah, you got a retirement plan all sorted then, have you?
No, I'm horrendous with all that kind of thing. Don't check my pension or anything. I'm awful. So
Always jealous of those people thinking that they got it all fixed.
yeah,
Hilarious.
not
All
me.
right. So, I mean, how does the typical week look like for you then, with that many kind of different roles?
Yeah, it's definitely really varied. So I can be in a secondary school one day looking at, I don't know, doing a psychology subject review, and then with, looking at GCSE and A level, and then the
Mm.
next day I might be in our infant school looking at early years provision, and then the next day I might be looking at behaviour leadership with the behaviour leaders across our schools, etc. I'd
Yeah.
say common things are getting into the schools to find out what's happening and working with leaders to identify kind of their strengths, their areas of development, to action plan, to do implementation planning, etc. And a big part of it is leading the leadership networks across our trust. So we have principals networks, behaviour leaders, SEND leaders, QEV leaders. I don't lead the principals one, but the other 3 I do lead. So that's like a big chunk as well, is bringing those people together.
Yeah.
So yeah, really varied, which is why I
That's
love it.
super cool. Yeah, that's cool, isn't it? And I mean, similarly to you, I've started off as secondary and I've increasingly, now I'm spending more time in primary, in early years, in, alternative provision, special schools. And it's fascinating to get a broader sense of education, um, And it feels like a privilege, but also it's a really unique position to be in because I don't know how you feel about your role, but for me, I feel like almost then like a hub or like a conduit of information, and that I get to go and see lots of things, then I can push it out in different directions.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it, and that's like Steve Carter's um vision, isn't it, of
Mm.
trust-wise school improvement, that it's
Yeah,
about getting information and then sharing that knowledge of good practice across your other schools and making sure it's
yeah,
acted upon, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Okay, well, let's get stuck into the podcast. And for those that are new to it, we have a kind of set structure with some decisions that Jade's chosen beforehand, some launch pads she wants to kind of talk about, some questions that she's chosen, and some key ignition points from her life where she's had a bit of a transformation, I guess. So this was her first question. It was, if you could wake up tomorrow having gained one quality or ability, what would it be? So tell us about that.
So I've said this for as long as I can remember, that if I ever had a superpower, it would be to not need sleep.
Oh,
And that is basically because I'm super busy. So
yeah,
obviously I'm busy at work and then try to do lots of stuff outside of work. And then I've got kids and husband
yeah,
and everything else. And I always think, I don't really like going to sleep that much. It feels like a waste of time. So then
yeah,
I always think, oh, imagine how much you could get done if you. And I
yeah.
do know about the importance of sleep. And like
Sure.
Brad Bush in a drive will be like rolling his eyes because he knows that the research on sleep is super important. So I know all of that. It's actually the one area of practice where I know the research and choose not to follow it anyway. Everything
Hilarious.
else, I'm like, yes, the research will do what that says. But with sleep, I'm like, still no. So,
Yeah,
so yes, to not be able to sleep, not have to sleep, and then I think, oh, I could just do all the boring stuff like
yeah,
tidying and all that kind of thing. You could
yeah.
do when everyone else was asleep at night time, and that would be great.
I
So,
love that. I remember, I mean, whether you had this conversation, I remember when my son, who's now 11, first did the maths of the fact he was asleep for a third of his life.
mhm.
And he was really angry then as well. He was like,
Yeah,
what? Well, what a waste of time. A third of my life asleep.
yeah, I
Oh,
agree.
brilliant. Yeah, well, there you go. You two would get on well then. So again, for people that are new to the podcast, there's this idea that I'm fascinated by around, you know, people having certain events in their lives that stand out as transformation points. And I've certainly got mine. Um, and Jay's chosen some that she wants to talk about. So tell us a bit about what was life like before, what was the ignition point, and then how did it transform you?
Yeah, so I actually found this quite tricky because when I was trying to reflect, I don't think I've got like individual moments where
Okay.
it's been a massive catalyst. I feel like it's just been a trajectory. I'm not sure, but I
Mhm.
have chosen some. So the first one I've put is my kind of realization that evidence informed practice and research in education was a thing. Now that
Right.
sounds ridiculous because it was about 2013 and the catalyst for that was life after levels. So we were
Right.
just coming up to life after levels. I was seconded onto the leadership team at my school, and one of the things, like, you get a project when you're on the
Yeah.
leadership team on a secondment.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we were looking at was how we were going to cope with kind of life after levels, I suppose. And I stumbled across the class teaching blog from
Okay.
Durham. Durham, it's now Research School, but at
I
the
know what you
time
mean, yeah.
it was Durrington High School. And because I was looking at what they were doing about life after levels, but then obviously now we know they have the blog of the week and all that kind of thing. And I've started to obviously read the blog, and it was like we didn't even call it retrieval practice then. They called it like memory tasks. This
Right.
idea that we had to retrieve information from our long-term memory in order to remember it more effectively in the future, etc. So, and then they'd done like book reviews, and it was like make it stick and why don't students like school, and
Yeah.
that, I guess, was the catalyst for me accessing and starting to read educational research. So I'd say before my
Yeah.
PhD was like the dark days of entertainment, where great teaching was, are the kids having fun, are they going to remember the lesson, not necessarily the content that you're teaching them, but just the fact that I don't know, it was dark and there was music playing or whatever it was that you'd done that day
Yeah.
to keep them interested. So that was the kind of before, not teachers weren't really allowed to just explain content to students. You had to like stick post-it notes around the room for them to find and all that kind of thing. The ignition point was finding the class teaching blog, and from that all of the research that was out there. And then after, I guess, is that has been or really determined the rest of my career, because evidence-informed practice has been what I've then implemented in my teaching, my department when I was the head of department, my school when I led teaching and learning across the school, my trust. It's all the stuff that I do outside of work. So yeah, an important one.
That's super cool, and of course we want people to take things away from this, and I guess the takeaway, my journey is very, very similar to that. Again, I now use stuff that I can't get it through my head how I ever got by not using it or not understanding it. But yeah, that idea that if you're not currently looking outwards, or if you're not currently engaging in lots of the free, let's put that out there, there's lots of free, CPD opportunities, and we recognize the challenges of time. But for those who don't sleep, this is what to do. But I think that's fascinating, isn't it? That there was this, and I was talking to Rob Coe recently, because of course his poor proxies for learning were the things that I was doing mostly. I was, again, sticking post-it notes under kids' chairs to see if they could find it, because that was engaging, and having random pictures at the beginning of my lessons to say, how do you think this might link to today's learning, and thinking that was the hook and stuff like that. Great. Well, again, I think that's a pretty common ignition point for lots of people, that engagement with external voices. Cool. Okay, well, let's talk a bit about this first launchpad then. As per normal, I'll explain a little bit about where this came from in my thinking, then we'll ask you a bit about why it resonates with you. So the title for this one was a slight play on words to the gambling slogan, actually, when the fun stops, stop. When the helpfulness stops, stop. And it came about because I pulled all of the teaching and learning leads from all my schools together to ask them about their kind of shared mental models for teaching and learning. And it sounded like an obvious thing to do, but it hadn't been done before. And it wasn't that long ago, it was maybe 4 years ago. And so we've got 35 schools now in our trust. So getting those people together face to face was, a challenge. And we ended up, long story short, exploring each other's mental models, refining them a little bit, and we came to a situation where we had some sort of shared understanding. And my next gut reaction was to publish that on the Trust's blog and say, right, this is what we think as a trust about effective teaching and learning. And then I had this reflection that maybe the helpfulness would start to dip post that. Maybe I'd got to the point of extreme, the optimal helpfulness just by having them together and developing it. So I created this idea that, the process of development is sometimes more useful than the product. And I thought about that with lesson plans as well. Planning a lesson on paper is useful, the process, and then the piece of paper you create is probably less useful. And so I thought about it from a leadership point of view, about we probably need to keep an eye on, is there a point of diminishing returns where our level of support then becomes unhelpful? And so I put it on this little chart, this graph, as we can see here, this idea of kind of, if you had the strategy or the development along one side and the helpfulness, you've got this initial kind of, I guess, jump, which I put as dialogue. So pulling those teaching and learning leads together to talk about the stuff was helpful. Aligning them somewhere, not standardizing, but aligning it was helpful. Creating what we called mental model sheets. They were just scraps of paper at that time, not big A3 sheets, which have now become electronic, was useful. But as I said before, my next instinct was to then publish those. And I started to think that actually, potentially, there's some negative stuff there, because, once you publish something, you might be inferring prescription, as in, I published it, so it's the truth, everyone needs to follow it. Just because I publish it on our blog doesn't mean that everybody gets to see it. So there's a mixed awareness, mixed engagement, possible misunderstandings because I'm not there to explain it. And then, of course, people take things and they infer their own things, so possible mutation. So I started to sort of think, oh, hang on a minute, maybe I should pull back from that And of course, the end of this, I suppose, is prescription. So if I'd gone on to say, like, this is the trust way of doing things, I think we would have experienced potentially reduced engagement, ownership, responsibility, accountability. With 35 schools, it would be almost impossible to publish something or prescribe something that fit every context. So you'd get a reduced kind of alignment in context. And then I guess people would stop innovating because they felt like it was done. And so that was kind of what I was thinking when I made this launchpad. But why did it resonate with you, Jade?
So probably for very similar reasons. So my role is similar to your role, I suppose, in that we are trying to get people from different schools and different contexts together to agree a mental model, to have a shared mental model, language, etc. around for you, and I've done teaching and learning, and I've done behaviour principles and SEND principles, etc. So that's why it initially first resonated. I also agree with your kind of possible issues. So I agree that if we prescribe, there will be reduced ownership, there will be reduced adaptation, and there will be reduced innovation. And I think that's definitely a risk that that you can take if it is everybody has got to teach in this certain way. I also agree in the larger text it mentioned about micromanagement and kind of not allowing people to make decisions for themselves. I guess that's how that's linked. So I agreed with that. And then kind of linked to that, I also agree with the benefits of dialogue, alignment and creation, and co-creation, and coming together to agree, actually, this is what we think great teaching and learning or great behaviour leadership or whatever it is that looks like. So I guess it's a bit of bias to start off with. I actually agree with what you were saying.
Yeah, nice.
But then it is that battle that you have at in a system leadership role. How far do you want consistency? How far do you prescribe? How far do you give complete autonomy? And so this was really interesting for me to look at the work that I do with my schools. We develop principles. So we don't say, for example, everybody has got to use cold calling. That's like descriptive technique, isn't it? We would say we want to use questioning techniques that ensure that all pupils think about the answer to the question. One of these may be cold calling, but there might be other things as well.
Yeah.
So it made me reflect on, okay, is that the right approach to take? It made me reflect on the importance of co-creation. So getting our leaders or teachers or whoever together, if we are trying to move towards alignment, but doing that collaboratively as opposed to the easier short-term way, quicker way, I guess, is, I've got loads of expertise in teaching and learning or whatever it is. I'm going to write down what our principles should be, and then I'm going to train you all to do that and hope that it then gets put into lessons, etc. But definitely re-emphasize the importance of that co-creation. And then I thought also maybe about how are we going to overcome the issues around publication and prescription? Because if we know there's best bets, don't we, in teaching and learning or behaviour leadership or SEND or whatever area you're looking at. And so we want to codify, I'm going to say, we probably do want to codify that, and we want to have discussions about it, etc. So how can we overcome those issues whilst getting all the benefits of having a shared language, etc. So yeah, really interesting one.
Well, it is super interesting, isn't it? And you know, I know we're dealing with these things at a trust level, but even at a school level, if you're leading teaching and learning at a school level, you're still faced with that kind of finding a sweet spot. I was kind of, you know, this idea between process and product, and somebody said to me, I wish I'd thought of it myself. They said, if they don't engage with the process, they won't engage with the product.
Yeah, really nice.
You know, or if they're not engaged in the process, they won't engage with the product. Probably a better one. And that's really interesting. And we haven't shied away from, we didn't throw those pieces of paper in the bin. They are published in a shared area. They're just published almost with an open hand, as in, look, this is what we at this moment in time thought was right. Please use these to inform your planning in your schools, with a little bit of an edge to it, in that if you don't use them, that there'll be a conversation about why you're not using them, because it was a shared understanding. But I think the bit I shied away from was like sticking it on the website. But
Yeah,
interesting stuff.
I really like the process product distinction, and I've done like implemented a consistent framework in two different ways. In my school, when I led teaching and learning, I did the bad way. I
Mm,
reflect on, which was I wrote the framework.
yeah,
Evidence informed practice wasn't as mainstream then. So you were starting like from scratch, from like people didn't know what retrieval practice was. No one had heard of cognitive load theory, etc.
yeah,
So I wrote it and then trained everybody. And actually it was fine. Like the staff
yeah.
were amazing, they were really open, they all got on board, etc. But since then, I've done it in everyone is going to be involved in the process of creating this thing. And it is a million times better in
Yeah,
terms of their understanding improves, obviously buy-in, the actual quality, because you've got like, I don't know, 25 people instead of one
exactly.
person.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, we could probably derail this whole podcast by talking about this, but the other thing I've experienced recently is staff in some of our schools saying, we don't want to be involved in all of it though, Chris. That's your job. You know, we're busy. So it's almost like they were saying, we don't want we don't want you to do all the work, but we don't want to do all the work either. Like
Yeah,
almost almost
that's
bring us,
interesting.
bring us, you do some heavy lifting
Hmm.
and then bring it to us, but
And I
bring it
guess
again
that's
with
like
an open hand.
I guess that's like, we don't want to read every single book that we need to read. So can you summarize that for us, please? Can you
Yeah,
give us a summary of what the research says?
yeah,
Which I completely understand. We
I
don't have
think so.
time
Yeah,
to do everything.
yeah,
So
and that's probably part what what uh, roles like ours are there to do, and that we do a bit of the heavy lifting. Okay, let's keep pushing on then. So your second fast friend question was this. Oh, what was your most treasured memory? Oh, tell us about that.
yeah, this is cute. I'm not really an emotional. I want to say emotional is probably sentimental. I'm not
Okay.
a sentimental person. And my next fast friends questions links will link. We'll come back to
Okay.
that. But um So I'm not really a massive sentimental person. So when I was thinking about treasured memory, obviously I've got like the birth of my kids and my wedding day and stuff like that, big events. But actually, I was thinking, when I think about really nice memories, what do I remember? So I've chosen being on holiday with my family.
Right.
I think it was about 2 years ago, but the years all merge, don't they? But I think it was
Yeah.
about 2 years ago. We were in the Isle of Wight, and not like dead normal day on a British holiday. I think we'd gone swimming because the weather was awful. So like, what do you do with two kids and not
Yeah.
in a seaside town when the weather's awful?
Yeah.
So we went through it. And we'd, I don't know, been for a walk or gone to the arcades or something like that. And then we were in the car on the way home, and my son, he's 7 now, so he was probably about 5 at the time, and his song in assembly, they have like assembly songs at their school. It was
Okay.
um it was "You've Got a Friend in Me" from Toy
Oh
Story.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Which is a
know.
bit cheesy anyway, isn't
I
it?
know it.
Yeah, I love it. So anyway, when it was his turn to choose like what song he wanted on, he only knew about 3 songs because he
Okay.
was 5 years old.
Yeah,
So we
yeah,
had
yeah.
that one, and we'd obviously heard it loads of times at holiday, so we were all like singing it together. And then after the song finished, my husband was like, "How cute a moment was that?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh yeah, that was such a cute moment." So yeah, that's my treasured memory.
That's great, isn't it? And
Yeah.
I think there's some learning in that for leaders as well about it doesn't have to be the big showpiece things all the time. Um, One thing that jumps to my mind, which I've been experiencing recently, and on reflection experienced it as a non-leader, was like, when, I don't know, a leader sends you a little email and says thanks, or the tiniest little bits of recognition or knowledge about you as a human, your family, those tiny little things I think go a long way, and it's easy to forget that. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. You have very expertly linked a very random memory to
Oh
something
yeah.
to do with education, leadership, which is extremely impressive. Well
There
done.
we go.
But I agree completely. It is, maybe our takeaway is that it's not the kind of always the big milestones that
No,
people need at work. Promotions and public praise and stuff is lovely, but
yeah,
actually just thanks. That was a really great piece of
yeah.
work. Can mean a
That's
lot.
really interesting. Okay, now you're making me now my brain's firing off. I did one which turned people were like, "What?" Where I wanted I was at AP, assistant principal in one of our secondary schools, and I had a real bee in my bonnet about culture development, and I wanted kids to open doors for people. And so, just for a whole week, I phoned home to every child who opened a door for me, and the parents were literally like, "What?" Like almost a bit kind of like, "You phoned me for what?" Oh, because your son, and you're a son of the war. But at the time, I thought it was maybe a little bit silly. But the reaction from them, and then the kind of the ripple effect was massive, because the kids, I don't know, let's just one kid got extra pocket money or something. He came back and he told his mate that he opened a door for Mr. Baker, and then he got this and that. And before I knew it, I swear, over a couple of months, genuinely, the politeness raised and the doors started getting open for visitors and all these things. And I thought that was a moment for me around culture change, that you can start with something really bonkers small. And if you just recognize it and reward it and reinforce it, it grows. Anyway, let's
Nice.
keep going. Yeah, maybe there you go. You can send some send some emails about that. All right, wow. Let's talk about ignition point two then. How
Okay.
did this change your life?
So this is, I don't know if this is if this is negative or not. I'm not sure. This is around 12. It was when I got pregnant. So it was 20, oh God, 2012 probably. Is that right? Yes, 2012. And I was seconded to the leadership team in my school, and I was doing my masters, and I'd done my masters credits as part of my PGCE. You know, when you
Yeah,
do that and you have like a certain amount of time to finish, I think it's 5 years to
yeah,
finish it, otherwise the credits kind of got lost. And I just had my dissertation to do, so I'd started doing my research and stuff like that. Then I fell pregnant, and the reason that I've chosen this as an ignition point is because I think the expectation, and my school was not like it was a great school in terms of culture. There were women on the leadership team, you know, etc. It wasn't like a school where you thought, oh gosh, like off you go then because you've had a baby and that's going to be the end of your career. It wasn't that at
yeah,
all. But definitely I think the expectation was, oh, you're going to go and have a baby. Don't worry if you don't want to come back on to and finish as a comment.
yeah,
I'm assuming you're not going to do your master's dissertation.
yeah,
That's going to fall by the wayside. Don't get me wrong, I get it as well that there's a limit to how much people can do, or for some people they would want to completely take that time, and that's absolutely fine.
yeah,
But for me, I was like, no, are you
yeah,
mad? Like,
yeah,
I wrote the dissertation on maternity leave, and I went back full time, and then did my leadership role properly after that, got properly onto the leadership team after that. So it
yeah,
was, I don't think at the time it felt like a massive catalyst. It was just a
yeah,
bit like, no, don't be ridiculous.
yeah,
But I think maybe that experience of having that expectation and
mm,
not feeling like I wanted to do that probably catalyzed my willingness to carry on despite having a family.
yeah. Again, I think that, like you say, not overly negative, but definitely a stimulus. And I think that's really interesting around. Well, I'm really fascinated about how leaders, we do things in classrooms that we typically then don't do outside of classrooms. The PD is a classic one. You know, like how many retrieval quizzes do staff do at the beginning of their staff PD? How much interleaving is there in staff PD and all that sort of stuff. And I wonder whether, on reflection, leaders don't maintain high expectations for their staff as much as they did for their students, maybe. That's interesting.
I don't know, because it's a balance, isn't it? Like you want to be supportive of someone. I was pretty young anyway. Family, you know, having family for the first time. I think
Yeah,
there's that you want to be supportive, don't you? And say like, don't worry if you want to come back to it later, or don't
yeah,
worry if now isn't the right time. And so it wasn't necessarily that I felt. I didn't feel like people were saying I should or
no,
shouldn't. It was
no,
just an expectation of
yeah,
like it wasn't even a question.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, funny.
That is funny. And I think, there'll be people listening to this who have been on the negative side of that. And obviously that is it's worth sharing, worth talking about so that we can stop that happening. Yeah, great, interesting. Okay, let's move on to this next one because this is, yeah, really fascinating. So again, I'll do a quick blurb about why I did this. This is another example. If people have got the book, they might have noticed that I get a kick out of making the titles of these things. Usually happens on like a walk. I'm like laughing to myself, and people, like thinking, "Oh, that'd be funny." And then that old dad joke thing where you think it's funny, and then everyone else goes, "I don't really get it. What are you talking about?" So if you're not into boxing, you wouldn't know what the Rumble in the Jungle is, but this is where this came from, and it's linked, as if you've done any of this stuff, about Brene Brown's work on rumbling in organizations. And so this is the idea of group culture can often make or break the effectiveness of meetings. And for me, certainly, I've had experiences of being in different team cultures that then have a direct impact on the way that meetings are done and how people behave. And this links strongly to kind of psychological safety and that sort of stuff, where I've definitely felt like I've been in teams where we've rumbled more and others where it's been quite sort of sterile. But so if we just go through the launchpad, this idea that if you have got sort of low psychological safety within a team, or that the goals are slightly misaligned, it can often mean that people are either filtering themselves and not sharing ideas or challenges or questions or concerns, but also potentially they're pulling in different kind of directions. And so Brene Brown talks about this idea of a rumble being, as you can read here if you've got it on the screen, a meeting where people willingly and purposefully engage in hard conversations to make progress towards a goal. And I think I read about it first in her Dare to Lead book, and she would say, look, okay, guys, let's rumble for this, or on Wednesday, let's do a rumble. And because it's a shared language, people know what that means and they know what to expect. And I thought that was fascinating. And so she talks a lot about, you know, if you're going to get this working in an organization or in a team, you got to do a bit of groundwork first, because for people to rumble effectively, they need to be kind of happy being vulnerable or being wrong, or, they have to kind of put aside any perfectionism, which I suppose is linked, that idea that you don't speak unless you think it's right is not how we rumble. Comfortable with complexity, because that idea that knotty problems kind of forget about being right. So there's something, the next one I thought is quite an Americanism, I think, but this hustling for their own worth. And this is really awkward when I read this, because I don't know whether people would think this of me or not, but I'm quite insecure as an individual. And I do find myself hustling for my own worth sometimes in meetings where I feel like I should say something, or I want to say something, I want to, drop a question that, everyone goes, wow, that's an amazing question. And I don't know, trying to explore where that comes from. And yeah, and then just to do power dynamics. And then the last thing really was, if you'll know that you're in a rumble if there's loads of different voices in the conversation. People are, sharing things quite vulnerably. They're genuinely curious. There's this idea of Kim Scott's compassionate candor. People are calling people out. You know, I'm sorry, Chris, I don't agree with what you just said. Like, oh, okay. This idea of pausing and circling back, I'll just come back to it. And then just stronger relationships. So tell us a bit about why it resonated with you, Jay.
So I love Brene Brown and I love Dare to Lead. It's one of my favourite leadership books. And everything that I think she said that you've just gone through really resonates with me in terms of creating an effective leadership culture. So I think there's a couple of things. The one side is being willing to be honest with people, isn't it? That compassionate candor, but doing it in a compassionate, respectful way. It's absolutely fine to disagree or to question or to challenge, but you do it in a respectful, professional way. Yeah. And I've definitely seen examples of either not being willing to challenge or challenging but not doing it professionally. Not in my current role, I will definitely say that, but in meetings I've been in previous roles. So I think that's super important. I think that the being open to feedback is often not thought of when we think about rumbling. I think what springs to my mind, maybe it's just me, is that kind of honesty, like being willing to challenge and not just accepting things or not saying anything if you don't agree. But actually, just as important of that is, like you've said, not holding things really tightly, not being sure that you're definitely right, not taking criticism or feedback in a negative way. So that's really important. And then I think I definitely think that if you can get it right, it is so beneficial in terms of decision making, the quality of decisions, the quality of action plans, all the really important stuff that we know happens in meetings, that is only effective if you have got this culture. So yeah, really like this one.
Yeah, and do you think leaders need to do, I mean, I hinted at it before, but a bit of prep, like you can't just, drop a rumble on people, can you?
Yeah, I think definitely you'd say I really want, well, I think you probably could once it becomes part of the culture and part of the
Sure.
norm. But I
Yeah.
think at the start it would be something where you'd have to like agree your behavior norms,
Yeah.
say all of this stuff, we're not going to take things personally, but we're going to be respectful when we express our opinions, all that kind of thing. You'd have to agree
Yeah.
all of that and do the prep. But also I guess you'd have to think about, well, what are all the possible ways in which we might see this problem that we're trying to solve, or this decision that we're trying to make,
Yeah.
so that you then could rumble. And also I think to start off with, it would take some good management, from
Yeah.
the person leading the meeting. So if you were the leader of the meeting, I think you'd have to prep for that and think about how you're going to get everybody to engage, how you're going to make sure you do get challenge, etc. So yeah, I do think
Yeah. Boy, and I think you're right. That, and other thing, how will you deal with conflict when it arises? I mean, again, if we think about the teams we're in, you'll know that, potentially certain people rub each other, they clash often, they've got differing viewpoints. It's really interesting. I mean, I don't know about you now, but I actively seek out people that disagree with me. Like, I need that kind of buffer.
I think you definitely want people who not necessarily are going to disagree with you, but are going to tell you the truth. So there's
Yeah.
definitely people who I can say, I think this is a good idea,
Mm.
and we'll go, well, but can you tell me what you think? And
Yeah.
that people will say, I think you've missed this, or if they say, yeah, I think it's great, you can be like, right, okay, I'm not mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really funny. One of the things I'm going to get, not that I've got a huge following, but I'll probably, lose followers or lose respect for me even mentioning this, but because it's to link with meetings, I feel like, do you remember De Bono's was it the Thinking
Thinking
Hats?
that. Yeah.
I feel like that has got a bad rap. I think like there's something like the principles of it. There's the
So I agree. It's got a bad rap, like most things that have bad raps. It's because they've been implemented so poorly. With the whole each child is going to wear a different coloured hat and only talk about that thing. But I
yeah
think in terms of making sure that when you are in a meeting, have we considered this element? Have we considered this element? This
yeah
element as like almost like a checklist of ways in which we've thought about things or
yeah.
whatever. That would be useful.
Oh, I'm glad I got a fellow, because I think for me that was my way in for psychological safety because I'd say, right, guys, let's put the black hat on, and that
That
permission.
depersonalize it, doesn't it? Yeah, it gives
Yeah,
people
it's like
permission
permission to
to,
be
yeah,
negative, you know what I
yeah.
mean? But also that ability to say, right, stop now. We're going to take that off. And like you say, it becomes silly when people buy, which I did do, buy people hats or, I tell you one really dumb thing I did once, guys, we're linking back to poor proxies. That idea that we used to do where the kids that finished the quickest then stopped working to go and help the others. And it
Hmm.
was like, okay, that seems like, but I used to have two shiny hats that they could wear. And they walk anyway.
Nice.
Those days are gone now, luckily.
Yeah, thank God.
Thank goodness. All right, and let's talk a bit about this last fast friends question then. So, here we go. When did you last cry in front of another person?
Yeah, so this is linked back to me earlier saying I'm not very sentimental or emotional
Yeah.
because I can't remember the last time I cried.
Oh, okay.
I'm not a crier. And
No.
everyone's always like, no, not at a film. Not, I'm like, no.
Nope,
Because what
nothing.
happens is if I ever start to feel like I might cry,
Yeah.
my brain says, well, that's not going to help you, is it? That's not
Okay.
going to move us forward.
Right.
So we'll stop that and we'll do something else.
Love
So
it.
actually, I
You've
just don't really cry.
rationalized it away.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's not
Sometimes I
useful.
do. Sometimes
Yeah,
I must do. But it must be when something like just gets me instantly, and then I cry
yeah,
before I know it. I can't remember any of those times.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm not. I don't really cry.
No. Well, if we're talking about crying, I think I've, similar to you in that I've like strategically applied it in that I've got some go-to like YouTube videos that make me cry. And
Oh
so
no,
I'm like, I fancy a cry. And
I
it's
don't get that at
basically
all.
it's usually my kids think it's hilarious because they're like, oh, he's watching. There's I think it's American Idol or some sort of singing competition where a guy from Hawaii he sings a song that's linked to his dad who died and all these things. My dad's still alive, but I love my dad so much that for some reason it gets me. And so we can hear my kids going, oh, he's watching the Hawaiian Kid again. And I'm just like sobbing in the corner.
Yeah, so I feel like you do the exact opposite of what I
Look,
do.
yeah. I'm like, oh, I fancy a cry,
No,
YouTube.
I don't get it. If
Um,
anyone's ever, I love reading, but if
yeah.
anyone ever like, oh, it'll make you cry that book, I'm absolutely not. I wouldn't read it then. Because
I
I'm
don't
like,
know
why
what
would you want to make yourself upset? I don't get it.
I don't know what the leadership link what the leadership link is there, but we'll yeah, we'll leave it. Well, again, what an amazing chat, and you know what a massive fan I am of yours, and so just a massive thanks really for people that are you know have not connected with Jade yet, that she's on all the socials, but also you've got to check this book out. I mean, tell us a little bit about the book.
So the book has got three sections. The first section is 20 research papers that I think every teacher should know about, summarized with kind of takeaways of the impact on your practice.
Mhm.
The second section is a number of kind of big evidence-informed practices like retrieval practice, explicit instruction, feedback, etc., and what the research tells us about those things and what they might look like in our classrooms. And then the third section is all about implementation and how, as a head of department or school leader or trust leader, whatever, you might implement those findings into the teaching and learning at your school.
Yeah, nice. Well, for me, it's a great example of what we talked about right at the beginning, in that if you're listening to this and you've yet to engage in some of the research or some of the wider thinking about teaching and learning, and then your second thought is, I haven't engaged with it because I just don't have time, I haven't got time to search, then you've done most that, you've given them a gateway into it. That first chapter, you would learn so much from that first chapter that would have an instant impact on your teaching that I think you'd be hooked. And that would be the kind of the launch pad for you then. So yeah, definitely check that out because it's and I don't think we should shy away from the fact that it's it's a cheat sheet almost, isn't it? It's helping
Yeah.
you.
I think the point was that it was trying to make evidence-informed practice accessible to
Yeah.
teachers who didn't have the time or didn't want to. You'll be like me. Like, there's nothing more I like than sitting and reading a research paper. I'm like giddy with my little
Yeah,
highlighter,
yeah, yeah.
ready to go. But lots of teachers don't have the time to do that or just don't want to, and that's fine. But they do want to know about what the research says. Or now, I think, because we're quite far in, I guess, in the UK's journey towards evidence-informed practice, they feel a bit like they've missed the boat and it's really
Yeah.
difficult to catch up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So this was meant to be a gateway into, look, this is the kind of basics that you need to know, and almost like you'd be able to join conversations around evidence-informed practice, and these are the
Yes.
things that these are either the ideas or the papers that people are likely to mention, and you'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's what it's done.
Oh, God, yeah, that's triggering even more thoughts now for me because I would imagine that lots of people don't rumble in meetings because they don't feel confident about their knowledge base. And this could be a way for people to actually engage in a teaching and learning rumble. Well, there you
Yeah,
go then.
yeah, nice.
That's a good sales pitch. Yeah, I mean, if you're into sort of, short summaries of stuff, and you like the Launchpad stuff, obviously there's the book, and you can connect with me on socials and that as well. And so the last thing to say is that, another thank you to Jade, and thanks to everyone for listening. I'll see you at the next one.